The Ministry of Planning said that African investments in Egypt are worth $2.8 billion and Egypt's investments in Africa are worth $10.2 billion with $1.2 billion of that amount added in 2018. The ministry added Egypt was eager to cooperate effectively with African partners in various development and economic areas as part of the African Union's Agenda 2063, especially given that Egypt is the African Union's current chair. It added that in this regard, Egypt had implemented a number of initiatives that included establishing an investment risk assurance fund in Africa, which aimed to stimulate Egyptian investors to direct their investments to African countries. The ministry noted that the Central Bank of Egypt was making significant efforts through its presidency of the Association of African Central Banks and was seeking to establish an African Central Bank and a fund to boost banking and financial stability in Africa. It is also working on supporting investment and development alongside Egyptian banks. This has begun to work in African markets to maximize trade exchange, support exports and imports, and provide required funds for joint trade and investment. Egypt supports the efforts to implement a number of infrastructural projects to achieve African regional integration, including the Cairo-Cape Town Road, which will increase the trade flow between African countries, the electronic linkage of African stock markets to enhance joint cooperation, and the exchange of experiences and expertise. On healthcare, Egypt is seeking to mainstream its experiences in African countries, especially its 100 Million Healthy Life initiative. At the same time, Egypt is also working to support African cooperations and achieve governance and support anti-corruption efforts. In this regard, Egypt is hosting a roundtable that will be organized by the African Association for Public Administration and Management in December, with the purpose of enhancing dialogue and exchanging experiences in the administrative reform sector. The ministry said Egypt had adopted a national program for economic and social development that included structural reform procedures in some sectors, especially in the energy sector.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Starting off our discussion right away. Engineer Miqati, now before we start getting into the details, let's take a general overview on what's happening between Egypt and the African continent. Now, Egypt, for a few years now, has been working on boosting ties with the African states, with it in all fields. Now, what are your thoughts on this, and how evident are these efforts, the Egyptian efforts, in trying to strengthen the relationship with the other African states?
Thank you, Mr. Hani, for inviting me, first of all, in your show. It's a pleasure, of course, to be with you. Egypt has been a long time, for the last couple of decades, far away from Africa. And we've lost a lot of opportunities over there. And it's about time that we become back. First of all, it is our backfield, let's say our backyard. Secondly, our trade balance, or our exports and trade agreement, business between us and Africa is very minimum compared to what Africa imports from the world. Africa is importing around 350 billion worth, US dollars worth of products. Our exports only to Africa is just above 2 billion, which is of course less than 0.5%, which is a negligible amount. What we are exporting altogether to the world is around 25 billion. So out of this, 2 only, or above 2, is only going to Africa, which is at least less than 10%. We have an immense opportunity to go to Africa. First of all, to East, because that's our Nile Basin, as we say. And this is where we should be focusing, and that's what the government has been focusing in the last couple of years, since our president has taken office. And us, as an association, that's what we have been doing, actually. We've taken the Egyptian businessmen, the industrial Egyptian businessmen, to Kenya. From Kenya, we've been going to Uganda, and then Tanzania, Zambia, and as well to south of Sudan in our products. What products we have and what we have as a competitive edge: we have the engineering products, we have the chemical products, we have the building material products, we have the pharmaceutical products, we have also the textile garments and all that. So this is a lot of products that Egypt has a competitive edge to go over there with the competition that lies with the other countries that are trying to penetrate Africa. It's not easy to go there, but there's also two main paths that we took as an association that we should focus on, because we need the relation to be built on win-to-win, not only going to try to sell to them and not adding any value, because the African countries, especially the ones that we are dealing with now, are also looking to that they want to develop industries within their countries, not only building their economy on importing. So what we're doing, and that was discussed with our current Minister of Industry and Trade, Engineer Amr, is that we need to export our brands. So we're taking some of our engineering companies, in the home appliance especially, and they're assembling over there in Africa. So you're still exporting, but also you're going to assemble. So you're creating an added value in the African country, and then you're selling within your brand. So that means the Egyptian brands are being marketed in the African countries, which gives you an added value more. Okay, so we're not only being an outsourced facility to the international Western market they are producing in Egypt for their brand names. Now we're taking our brands now to the African markets and creating at the same time an added value in the country, which is received and appreciated very well by the African countries. The second thing is that we're looking at is the agricultural development. Is huge vast of land. Everybody around the world, from the south part of the States to the Canadian part to Europe to the Gulf, they are all investing in development of agriculture in Africa, because that's the future. Agriculture in Africa. So we as Egyptians, with the vast history of agriculture and what we have all around through our histories, we see an opportunity is to help the Africans to develop their crops. The main crops, which is wheat, barley, soybeans, maize. With the experience, I mean, the inputs of the agriculture comes in pumps, comes in agricultural equipment, comes in the fertilizers, comes in the seeds, comes in irrigation system, which Egypt is already very, very well advanced in all of that. And we have the manpower to do that. So we had an experiment done in Cameroon with the support of the current ambassador of Cameroon, His Excellency Barang. And we did a development of 50 acres over there. Okay, 50 hectares, sorry. And the productivity was double the previous productivity they had in the crop, which of course was received well. We trained the farmers over there with our engineers. They have been using our machinery on a friendly basis. They need charter to know how it is. So I see that if we go through agricultural development and help them to grow their own crops, their own food, that is something very important. And that brings us very close to the African countries, because at the same time we are importing barley and we are importing soybeans and we are importing maize and we are importing wheat from other western side. So why don't we start importing from Africa? So that means then I am helping you to grow your product, and at the same time, if it's feasible, then I will start importing my needs from you. So it's again a win-win relationship.
Situation. Well, Engineer Miqati, now you've mentioned many different sectors and great opportunities for trade and investment within the African continent. I'll take a step outside and look at Egypt's participation, for instance, in the TCAD summit in Asia and also the G7 summit, talking about Egypt was there in both summits as its own political role that is being played within the region, also head of the African Union. Now, what do the African states need from the developed countries? Before we understand that the African countries like to export raw materials, export many things, but what do we need first from them? Do we need the finances? Do we need the know-how? Do we need the training? What are the exact needs from the developed countries within the African states?
I mean, exactly what you said. Of course, you need to develop industries within the countries, because no economy can depend on only importing all their needs. There's no future, there's no sustainability in that. So that means we need to grow what we eat, first of all, because food and land is the essence of any business. Then you need also to produce what you need. Okay, the basics of your needs. Home appliances is something everybody needs in the basic daily needs. Building material, you need to do infrastructure, you need to do constructions, because that's one of a major sector that has a lot of workers that works in. I mean, a lot of people that will go into the sector. That's what's happening in Egypt now. We're building all these 14 cities. So a lot of work is happening around. There's a lot of possibilities for everybody to work. So building sector. So we need to buy or to get the know-how from the Western side or from the international arena of the industries. But beside this, we need to train the people on how to work with these industries. And at the same time, you need the angel funds, you need the financial institutions that has to go there and work together, because without the financial institutions, the industries cannot grow. I mean, what happened in Egypt, there was, like you see the international bank, the funds that we're getting, the banks from the Gulf that came here and helped us to, with our industries, with our projects. So you need the financial institutions. And that's what Egypt is taking this role and doing, is that transferring know-how over there, doing training. I mean, our Minister of Agriculture was looking to train farmers from Africa on how to grow the land. So bringing them to Egypt on our account, training them, and then sending them back. Because that's also will create and develop ties between you and the African countries. You have a lot of Africans who came and also been educated in our universities. Again, this creates belonging, because they came and learned in the Egyptian Cairo University, Ain Shams University, and starting from a lot of presidents that came here. So this is something that we need to be ongoing. We, as Egypt, could also be acting as a hub for European on Western side who wants to export their products to Africa. They can come and assemble in Egypt, especially in the economical zone on the Suez Canal, assemble in Egypt, and from Egypt export to Africa, utilizing our free trade agreements. We have a COMESA agreement, which is within 21 countries. And if we talk about the triple trade, that goes up to 27 countries, all the way down to South Africa. So that means if you come and assemble in the economical zone in Suez, and from there you export to these countries on the eastern part of Africa, then you're utilizing the benefit of the free trade agreement. Whereas if you export directly from Europe or from Asia or from wherever, you are going to pay customs. So this is an advantage that we have to utilize. And we have to market Egypt as the hub for international industries who wants to go to Africa. Come and assemble in Egypt, and together we go. We are cheaper. We have a pivot that is geographically nobody can meet, because all the transports are there going through the Mediterranean, through the Red Sea, has to pass through Egypt. Even the flights passing over, they has to go to Egypt. This is something that we can build on them. And at the same time, Africa is very rich with their own resources. You have minerals, you have wood, which Egypt is importing from Lesotho. We can import the wood. We have tea. We're the second largest importer of tea from Kenya, of the Pakistan. We can bring in the tea, pack it in Egypt, export it to Europe. So that's another thing that you're working with the Africans, taking their products, packing it in Egypt, and selling it in Europe or the international market. So again, you are becoming a hub to the African countries, as well as a hub to the Western side.
Engineer Miqati, do you feel that it is easier to actually export to European and American and Asian countries more than the African countries? Is it becoming easier? Is the African free trade continental agreement now, do you feel that it made things easier, or are there still obstacles within the African states, whether it's bureaucratic obstacles, transportation, the paperwork? Do they constitute certain challenges that actually it would be easier for Egypt to export to other countries outside of the African continent?
Look, no, I would say that most of the Egyptian businessmen, everybody was looking up to Europe, to the States, okay?
Is it more profitable?
Not much, not in all the sectors, okay? I would say some of the sectors. But again, nobody looked downwards, okay? And nobody thought that there is a growing market downwards on a finished product. Africa is importing everything. It's a market buying $350 billion worth of products. That's a big market.
Yes.
And we as Egypt has a very minimal part of that. So there's an opportunity that lies ahead. Even if you double or triple what you're exporting, nobody from the competition is going to feel you. It's going to make a difference in our exports, but still you're not on the radar from the other competitions. So I'm one of the manufacturers. We were looking only to export to Europe, okay? But when we started to seize the opportunity, there is an opportunity in Africa, and they're not looking for cheap quality. They're still looking for good quality and a good price, like everywhere in the world. So people that think that they will sell their commercial product or their second quality to Africa is not going to be accepted over there. Still, the Africans, especially in the eastern part where we have been there, Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania, they look for a good quality, acceptable, and they have standards. If you do not meet the standards, you don't enter their borders. And they have certain inspectors, international inspectors, that they inspect the product before it is even shipped from Egypt, if this is meeting the criteria or not. So I think there's a huge opportunity that lies in Africa, whether it's in the eastern part or the western part. But the challenge is in the logistics, like you said, because yes, we have some transportations going to east, but it has to go through Oman, the port of Salalah. So there's no direct transportation going to Mombasa, for example, or Dar es Salaam, which again, there's a transit time of 40 days. But if it goes directly, it's in 18 days. So that means your export can increase if you're going on a direct. And that's what our Ministry of Public Affairs now is working on doing. This is a project called Gusur, is that they will create a direct line to Mombasa that will enable the Egyptian exporters to have a quicker transport over there. Then in the next year, they are planning to have warehouses over there through a third party where you can have your products on consignment present in the warehouse so that you can be ready to sell immediately, okay? Not wait until you import from Egypt. However, on the other hand, going to the western side is very more challenging because there's no vessels going from Egypt directly to the western side. It has to go either to southern part of Europe, then to Morocco, then to the western part. Okay? And that's a very long one. So this is something that we as an Egyptian, together with the government, has to think, how are we going to develop a logistic sea freight line that goes from Alexandria all the way to the transport. Then again, it's the chicken or the egg. Which comes first? Do you create the volume first or do you create the line? So I think the government has to create the line, subsidize it for 1 year or another, and then until the volume is developed, and you might be also importing, because there's a lot of things on the western part. There's also commodities in the western part of Africa. There's minerals in the western part of Africa. So then you can start importing, and this is where the volume begins.
Yes. Well, what about, you spoke a lot about Eastern Africa and Western Africa. What about Southern Africa?
Southern Africa is a market dominated by South Africa.
Yes.
So I would think is that we leave this to be the third stage. Our first primary stage entering Africa is the eastern part, is the Nile Basin, for several reasons, politically and economically. Then your second stage would be the western part, because again, there's a lot of resources, there is a lot of opportunity. I mean, Liberia is importing 90% of their rice, okay, what they eat. So where is Egypt? Why don't we go and grow rice over there? And then we import the rice, because at the end, instead of exporting rice, which basically you're exporting water, go and grow it in Liberia, bring it back. So that's what it means. You're importing, you're saving on your water, because again, we're facing challenges in our water. But the southern part of Africa is a dominant market with the South Africa. And I think we should not start with our highly competitive markets. We should start with something that is a bit less competitive. It's not that South Africa is not present in both markets, East and West and Central, but at least we have more competitive edge in pricing, in quality, than South Africa.
Yes. Engineer Miqati, now we understand, according to the Ministry of Planning, that Egypt is investing in Africa worth $2.8 billion and the $10.2 billion, and the Egyptian investment and the African investment in Egypt is worth only $2.8 billion. Now, is this a realistic assessment of how the two-way trade is going, or is it because we're exporting a lot but only importing back, only needing to import back a little bit, so it's it's not as huge of a gap as we can imagine. And if it is a huge gap, how can we lessen it?
Look, I see a huge potential of Egyptian investments going to Africa, especially in the home appliances or engineering sector. Currently, presently, we have one of our major engineering companies in the in electricity.
Electronics.
They are in electricity and engineering part. They are investing over there. They're doing power stations. They're selling the cables and so on and so forth. So I see a huge potential of engineering companies going there to assemble their products. That means you're investing. Okay. I see also potential in agricultural development. I see pharmaceutical companies going to do polyclinics, which is a mobile clinic, more or less, which gives us an opportunity to export our medical equipments, our consumables, medical consumables. That means enhancing our exports again. And that's a direction that is going there. So our exports are heading to increase. Our investments in assembling and in marketing is going to increase in these sectors, engineering as well as pharmaceutical and agriculture. As per the other sectors, if we're talking about textile, I mean, maybe the home textile could be increasing over there, but as you know, Ethiopia is also developing their textile industries, and the western side is going to Ethiopia to do that. So what we see, especially in the garments, ready-made garments, what we see Egypt can focus on the textiles and export it, then they will do the ready garments over there. So you're creating another added value that you're only doing the textiles and they do the ready garments. There has to be a link that complements both countries, us and whichever African country. So that's another sector that I see. When you tell me about is African countries coming to invest in Egypt, this I don't know, of course, because I don't know what the Africans are planning and which country is planning to come ahead. Egypt has does it have opportunities? It has immense opportunities. I mean, if you look at the real estate development, that's enough. The return on investment is real estate is enormous. Okay, if you look at the industries in the building material, it is there. If you look at the engineering, we're increasing, we're exporting. If you look at the chemicals, it is increasing every year, the exports of the chemicals. So we have a lot of opportunities if people to come and invest in it. But what I see is that how can we, and that's the role of the government, how can Egypt be more and more lucrative to be an investment hub? And that needs is that we more and more work on removing our challenges and the bureaucratic procedures in establishing investments, so that we have to pave the way to the investors come. We are the hub, we are the destination for your investment in whatever sector you're looking at, and we will take you through our trade agreements that has been there, because we have with the Africans, we have the Agadir, with the Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan, and Egypt, and the European. We have with Europe, we have with the States, the quiz, I mean, and we have with the Gulf. So we have several advantages of having people to come, investors, and invest here. And become as a hub together, whether you're going to go down with me to Africa or you're going to go from Africa down with me to Europe, up with me to Europe. So that's how we should market ourselves.
Yes. Engineer Miqati, you've mentioned a lot of good opportunities and potential in different sectors that we're already very good and very strong in the agricultural sector, for instance. You talked about electricity. You also mentioned health, and we're going to talk later on that. But what about sectors that Egypt is becoming quite a significant player, for instance, the energy sector, discovering the natural gas in the Mediterranean, the Zohra gas field. Now, are exporters and investors here in Egypt thinking, well, this is a new market, maybe we should work and study the exploration and the liquefaction of the natural gas, and not just export it to Europe, in Eastern Europe and Russia, but also trying to transfer that to the east and the west of Africa?
Look, I mean, the two main, or the three main sectors that we should be focusing on, and Egypt could have a very competitive edge in it. Energy, because that's the future, and energy in its main sphere. It's not only gas, it's not only fossil oil, but it's also solar. Okay, and we have this one in Mimban in south of Egypt. So solar energy is a future energy when you have the wind also. So this is some Egyptian companies now has an experience in doing these projects, and in the private sector especially. And I think one of the main investments that in this 10 billion you said about in Egypt is in the energy sector with the private sector in Africa. Then we have also the service sectors. Egypt could have a competitive edge above all the surrounding countries if we export our services. Coming to say auditing, coming to say lawyer, law services, IT services. You can also become a developer of apps, same as what India has, because we have a lot of bright students and bright young people already developing apps. So this kind of services of, you see the deliveries to the houses, these are all services. We can take these services and export them to our African countries because they don't have them. But we're not underestimating Africa. I mean, Kenya has their fintech much higher than what in Egypt. Everything is paid on mobile. Even your salaries are got on your mobile. So they are more advanced because everybody has a mobile. They don't have landlines, and everybody's doing everything on his mobile in Kenya. So that means how can we, and that's what the government is doing, to be everything going to be digitalized. Because that's the future. And how can we build industries on digitalization? And that's what we should be focusing and build our competitive edge in that part. And be ahead of all the neighbor countries. And this will give us a competitive edge. I mean, like, we were trying to produce normal cars since decades. Let us start now with the new wave of electrical cars. It is still new. Let us take an opportunity, bring a partner, whatever, internationally from where, and let us do an electrical car here and becomes an Egyptian, and then sell it in the African market. So we be ahead of others. So we have to look, what is there the future? Artificial intelligence, where? We have to have a plan. How can we have a step and a major foot in artificial intelligence? Through our young people, through partners from the international arena, come and work with us here. And from here, we will go to Africa.
Engineer Miqati, now you've mentioned electrical cars and artificial intelligence. Now Egypt has its own vision of achieving sustainable development in by 2030. The whole of African continent to reach that sustainable development by 2063. Now, as chairman of the Egyptian Exporters Association, do you feel that now the kind of products that you could be exporting, or the demands by the other African states to achieve at least that sustainable development goal by 2063, do you feel that now maybe different kinds of products are demanded to be exported? Are we now demanding different kinds of, or different qualities of the products we're already importing and exporting?
Look, first of all, when going out to not to a new market, but a market that you're not strong in it, you have to go, first of all, with your current industries, which you have. But at the end, look where in future what you'll be doing. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're selling the normal industries, again, like we said, engineering, building material, pharmaceutical, and textile and so on. But we have to create the demand in Africa on the new technologies. We have to show them that we are on the path of the new technologies, and on the service sector especially, because they are looking in solar energy now. Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, they're looking in solar energy because energy is very important for them, especially for their industry. So everybody's looking at. So what can we do in Egypt in this, and how can we cooperate with them? The second is that thinking is the IT. I mean, you see companies in Egypt representing international companies, especially in the ERP systems. The Europeans, they don't go there to implement. They take Egyptian companies to go and implement the ERP system in governments in Africa. So that's a service. So how can we, being representing international companies, take this young SME Egyptian one and do the service over there? So we have to market for them. We can do the job on IT services. Can we do another smart village as we did successfully in Egypt twice? Can we do it in Africa? Yes, we can do it. So why don't we take the initiative and we create a smart village for them over there? Because that means you are making a change. You're not only working on the current exports or the current industries that we said said a while ago. No, we are also putting you or working with you on future. Let us build a smart village. Let us, you become a hub for technology, for people to come there. We helped you to do this. This is what we need to do. We need to work closely with them on what they see or aspire as a vision for the countries. So that means...
Well, how can that be done? I mean, the big investors, the big businessmen, the big manufacturers do have the connections, do have the know-how of how to reach other markets, but what about the SMEs? What kind of investment and what kind of encouragement, what kind of subsidies can be offered for the SMEs to encourage them to think ahead and aim even higher and go to different markets?
When you look at what other countries did, look at the Americans, what went out? The major 10 industries went out. I mean, I don't know if we're allowed to name them or not, but Coke, Pepsi, all these big guys, the jeans, the words, these are the companies that went out.
Yes.
When these big guys go out, then they bring in the SMEs with them. Same has happened with Europe. The big guys moved because they have the means, they have the facility, they have the manpower, they have the resources, so they move and then they bring their SMEs. Same as what is happening in Egypt. And what happens when a company like the Arab Contractors is present in 23 countries, what are they doing and what have they been doing? They're importing their building material and their needs from Egypt. And these are coming from SMEs. So you need to get, if we're talking about infrastructure, companies like the construction companies in Egypt, like some of our neighbor countries did, is take our construction companies out. They're going to take 92 different SMEs industry within the sector, starting from the carpenter, the builder, the painter. These are going to work with them. So we need these big guys move first, and then the small ones will come. Even if you go with polyclinics, you will start with the polyclinics, and then you get the SMEs in the medical, the ones who are doing the cotton, the ones who are doing the small scissors and cutting, the ones who are doing the plasters. So these are also SMEs. But you took first the pharmaceutical company that went there and built the polyclinic or the hospital, then it pulled with her the SMEs.
Yes.
So you need, as a government, as other governments have done, encourage the big guys in different sectors to go out to Europe, to go out to Africa, and pave the way, and be their marketeer in this government, in this African country.
Yes.
So your government becomes your marketeer in the government in Africa.
Yes.
So when you're there, then you're going to pull in your SMEs within your sector.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Engineer Miqati mentioned, now the polyclinics, the pharmaceutical companies creating the market within other African states. There has been a lot of Egyptian efforts within the health and pharmaceutical sector. We sent our own clinics in South Sudan and Chad to fight hepatitis C and ended there. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
An Egyptian medical team was sent to Chad last week as part of the presidential initiative to treat 1 million Africans of hepatitis C. This comes in light of Egypt's presidency of the African Union, and it's keen to open centers in a number of African countries, seeking to support them in detecting hepatitis C and treat their citizens. Egypt also aims to transfer Egypt's experience in the presidential initiative, 100 million healthy lives, to eliminate virus C and detect non-communicable diseases. The Egyptian medical team will open a hepatitis unit under the slogan, "Long Live Egypt, Africa," in the Chadian capital, N'Djamena. The Health Ministry spokesperson Khaled said the medical team includes a liver and digestive consultant, a clinical pharmacist, a clinical pathologist, and a systems and information specialist. He added that this medical team will train the Chadian cadres to test for hepatitis viruses, dispense treatment, adding that the team will include doctors, pharmacists, and lab officials. Moreover, he pointed out that a shipment of medicine from the treatment of virus C and B was sent with the Egyptian medical team to support the clinic at the Chadian hospital with all the necessary medical supplies and medicines. Ngehed noted that another Egyptian medical team opened a similar unit in Juba last month.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Engineer Miqati, now, the President spoke of the 100 Healthy Lives initiative here in Egypt, and we've already screened 60 million for virus C and other diseases. Now we're sending our own clinics to South Sudan and Chad. You spoke of creating the market, showing the other countries that you know how to do this. How is that such an important step to achieve that goal?
I mean, what has been done in Egypt hasn't been done in any part in the world. To scan 60 million in less than 2 years, to cure them from hepatitis C at a fraction of a cost from what used to be paid to be cured of disease, this is something not done before. So there's something that we have to, first of all, thank our president and our administration and the pharmaceutical companies that has worked together collaterally to achieve this. Now, what Egypt has always been doing is that they always share whatever they have with the rest of the world. And we have been doing this in ages. Now, doing this, it is, of course, our responsibility that towards Africa, and that's what the president, since he's now the president of the African Union, is that we are going to share with you, Africans, what we have done. And Egypt is going to treat the first 1 million Africans in hepatitis C. Okay, we started with South of Sudan, we started with Chad. Of course, we're going to go to the rest of the African countries. But that's an initiative. Nobody else also from the international or from whatever, any part of the world has taken this initiative. But it's something that we have to do to the African countries. Because we need to work with people like His Excellency said, healthy people. And we need our people to be healthy. Because when you're healthy, you're more productive. Okay? You're more as an added value to your country, to your economy, and for a future sustainable future. So what we're doing there is not only treating them, but we're sending our doctors. We're sending our medical equipments. So we're also sending our medicine. So you're also exporting. On the other hand, you're exporting, you're treating, you're curing. That means at the end, you're capturing the hearts of the Africans. What do you need else? When you capture the heart of the Africans, then you have a long-term tie that is there for the future.
Yes. Engineer Miqati, now, with all of these, the participation in these international summits, creating these markets, sending your own missions, medical and health missions, now, that's all happening when Egypt is heading the African Union. What happens when the term ends and we're not heads of the African Union? Does anything change? Are things easier now or more feasible and more practical because we're heading the African Union?
It shouldn't be. I mean, our president, with his current office in the African Union, he boosted and enhanced our relationship with Africa and set the roadmap. But we should be continuing as a private sector. But of course, again, like I said earlier, the government, Egyptian government, has to pave and market the major Egyptian companies over there in the African countries. But the private sector should continue because there is the opportunities over there. It's lie ahead. And our participation within the international summit should continue on focusing the opportunities there are guys in Africa in collaboration with us. So, I mean, we have a big summit coming in Russia, in Sochi, which is called Russia-Africa, which is headed by both Presidents Putin and His Excellency, our President Sisi. And there will be 20 African presidents present in this summit. Okay? So our role as private sector and as Egyptians to be present is again to highlight that Egypt is the hub for the Russian companies to come and assemble here, especially in the engineering sector, in the economical zone where they have an industrial zone over there. And together, we're going to sell our export to Africa. And again, we have, as an association, has prepared a map for the seasonal crops across Africa. So we would know when and where and in which country, which crop will be grown. That means because for each different crop, there is a different machine to be used to grow this and cultivate this crop. That means we need to assemble this machine in Egypt to sell it to this country. and to sell it to that country. So this kind of information, as an association, we have developed, we have worked, and this is what we're going to give in the summit to the business sector there, to show them that's the opportunity in Egypt in the agriculture sector. The same in the medical equipments and medical consumables. There's a lot of Russian companies companies in that sector. Come work with we have 250 companies in the medical sector, okay, exporting, but they're only exporting around $250 million. We need to work on increasing this number, and we can increase it easily in the African market. But we will increase it when we also establish the polyclinics. So why don't we, when we have a summit like this, is market for the opportunity that lies in Africa. So I see that when we are participating in international summits outside Africa, it's an opportunity for us to market Egypt as the hub to join us going to Africa.
Yes. Engineer Miqati, now, because we're running out of time, I want to just figure out something now. It seems that the public sector is the main drive for this cooperation, or is it the private sector? Do you want to see more initiatives by the private sector happening in the future? What do you think would be facilitating the activities and the initiatives from the private sector?
The private sector has to be always the main driver of the economy. You cannot say the public sector is the driver. No, the private sector is the economy. And at least has to be 70 to 75% of the economy driven by the private sector, because that's where the sustainability. The government is basically paving the way. The regulations, the decrees, the laws, that's what they should be focusing on, and opening to us new roads through the relationships between administration and administration, like other countries are doing. That's what the Americans are doing, that's what the Russians are doing, that's what the Europeans are doing, each country by itself. That's what we should be doing to Egyptian companies, is that government, that's the role, to pave the way, to work on removing the challenges that we are having when we want to go out to export, to minimize the challenges for investors to come in here and invest, because when you are getting investors, that means you're enhancing your economy, you're creating more opportunities for workers to do. You are definitely going to enhance the exports because new investments came in. So this is what we should focus. How can we be the pivot of attracting more investors to come and invest industrially wise, and at the same time look to export their products, whether it's to Africa or to any part of the world. I mean, there is, as we know, there is a boycott on the Russian from Europe. So why don't we bring the Russians, come and assemble in Egypt and export to Europe? Then you've bypassed them. But we as a private sector has to work with the counterparts. We cannot just depend on government to government and they convinced and they push the companies to come in. No, we have to create the opportunity to the private sector. This is the opportunity, and that's what you'll be gaining, and that's what you're going to be enhancing. So it's the private sector. But this still is the role of the public. It's what I told you. For example, what the Ministry of Public Affairs is doing is that they're going to create a way to go in a quicker direction to Mombasa instead of staying 40 days. They have to find another way of going to the western part, because the private sector cannot do this. And it's not the role of the private sector to do that. But it's the government to do this through their ministries, is how can we go to western part? How can we work with the international shipping lines on creating this line over there, subsidize it for the first 2 years, like we had one before between Alexandria and Trieste. There was a direct line going every week, and our exports increased going to Europe. We need to do this, and that's the role of the government.
Yes. Well, the infrastructure and transportation of it, as you mentioned. Well, Engineer Miqati, do you feel that now with the private sector, with all the effort and the importance and the significance that the private sector should be having in leading the exports, do you feel that there's still more obstacles that need to be overcome?
When talking about exports? I mean, like I said again, I don't want to be repeating myself, it's the challenges of the logistics, is creating the demand. On the other side, working in, marketing for the Egyptian products. is, of course, one of what we lack, and this is an obstacle, a challenge for the investors, is the skilled people. We don't have skilled people. That means we need to work on our vocational education here, and we need. That's what the government is looking at also, vocational education, because we lack a lot of skilled people. The demand in that is immense, and this is something that we need to focus on. And last but not least is, how can we have more and more trade agreements done? I mean, we have one with the southern part of America, in South America. We need to see where other opportunities lie in east part of what we used to call east part of Europe. This is again very weak when talking about Egyptian exports. What can we do together with our government to overcome this?
Yes.
Okay. So that's something we have. I mean, there's the Egyptian commercial service offices that definitely can work together with the private sector to create these opportunities.
Yes, and as Engineer Miqati mentioned, there is a lot of attention now being focused on the Egyptian and African market in general. We'll be looking forward to the summit that will be held in Sochi later on in the year. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Engineer Khaled Miqati, Chairman of the Egyptian Exporters Association. Engineer Miqati, it was a pleasure having you with us.
My honor.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.